Hello, John Michael Chambers here. Follow Intel and Insights now weekly every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern with Juan like you've never heard him before. Visit johnmichaelchambers.com and ampnews.us to view the broadcast at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. The title of this episode is What's in Store for 2024? And now a man who has been serving this nation since the time of Ronald Reagan, his clandestine assignments and self-imposed directives, many which are unknown to the public, play a critical role in protecting this nation and its interests for decades. Good friend and most valuable voice and resource for the new media. This week's episode again is titled What's in Store for 2024? And now, please welcome Mr. Juan O'Savin. Hey, Juan, Happy New Year.
Hey, how you doing there, John?
I'm good. All right, me and my formal introductions, but there we are, folks. Let's get right into the matter. I have an important kickoff question. Now that we're ringing in a new year and so much has happened just in the last 48 hours. With all that is unfolding, Juan, in this critical year, outline, if you will, just a couple of what you feel may be the most critical events, and that's the key word, events, and how they may play out that you see coming here in 2024?
Well, again, 2020 election is not over yet. And, we talked about even the imagery that you have for the show today. People think 2024 is what this year is really all about. I think that we don't actually get to an election at the end of this year, that events transpire that pause this election at some point in time. Now, who initiates that? I don't believe it's, people are looking for white hats and military and Trump and, all sorts of things. The reality is that on the 2020 election, in the hours after the election was completed on November 3rd, 2020, in the wee morning hours on November 4th, multiple sites stopped the vote count for a number of hours. And when they restarted it, there was suddenly all sorts of new votes that turned up. Things were reversed. There was all sorts of shenanigans. And they continued on. That is a theme that has been repeated and will be repeated again. When we got to the vote electoral college, what January 6th was all about was the fact that numerous states, their electoral college votes were going to be challenged, which means that the Senate would leave the House chamber, go to its own chambers, and both the legislators and the senators would debate whether or not to allow in the electoral college votes from multiple states as they were challenged. Amazingly, just as the count was about to be challenged, starting with Alabama, that's when the huge magnetic locks on the doors to the Capitol were released and protesters were allowed inside. Now, this wasn't just protesters breaking the doors down and busting the windows out and getting in. From a remote location, those doors were released. And that was only done after police officers, Capitol police officers, had gone into the restrooms dressed in their Capitol Police uniforms, changed into civilian clothing with Trump paraphernalia and MAGA paraphernalia, and then were blending into the crowd as the doors were released and opened. That was done with military precision, just as the Senate was walking to its own chambers to begin this deliberation. When that was paused because of protesters in the building, and then later restarted all of those challenges to the Electoral College votes did not occur, that a number of legislators and senators had planned to conduct during that day. That's a very important feature. That pause allowed for political shenanigans uh, uh, and all sorts of coercion about how the electoral system in America was under attack and how stability in America, we were looking like a banana republic and the supposed riots, etc. And therefore, this pause occurred. When they came back, it didn't happen the way that it was supposed to. At this point in time, as the year progresses, with all of the challenges that the current administration faces on bribery, payoffs, blackmail, coercion, falsehoods in the vote counts, there will be a rising uproar, political uproar, various other societal questions and challenges that will make it very difficult to imagine a scenario where the Biden administration will win another 4 years in 2024 election. Additionally, it's very difficult because the Democrats missed a couple of opportunities or time periods that they intended to do a change-up, to switch out the president and vice president. And now they are coming into a period where it's extremely difficult. I talked about it even with your audience, John, this last year, that one of the punishments for someone who is caught in the act of murder in the Roman times was that the murderer was shackled neck to neck, waist to waist, foot to foot with the person's corpse whom they had murdered, and that was their punishment. The Democrats are suffering something similar. They are bound to President Biden and Kamala Harris. They are bound to them, and they're having a difficult time releasing themselves, extracting themselves from that. And this current administration is literally a decaying corpse in so many ways. And the inability to separate themselves and to bring in the fresh blood that they had intended is catastrophic for them. So the longer that this goes on, the greater likelihood that the third pause would be a suspension of the vote for some unknown reason out into the future. Now, what could those reasons be? Is it some type of escalation of the war in Ukraine? Belarus now has tactical nuclear weapons supplied by Russia. The placement of those nuclear weapons is complete. Putin 2 days ago, actually 4 days by the time you broadcast this, just before New Year's Eve, had an emergency meeting of many of the politicians and military staff concerning the situation in Ukraine. This followed a day and a half of missiles and aerial bombardments inside Ukraine, which was the heaviest since the war began. That has continued for the last several days, and there's no real end in sight. Probably could go on for literally the rest of the week. With that in mind, is the Ukraine situation coming to an end or not? Or is it a stalemate? The reality is, to break out of that stalemate position, or because the threat rises to some certain level, would one side or another use a weapon of mass destruction? Remember, on the Ukraine side, Russia came in, and one of the first things they did was to close down and seal off 54 biolabs that were operational inside Ukraine. of which Hunter actually sat on the board of the company that was running some of those labs. That was one of Putin's major complaints, is that for several years, and he complained to the UN, this is not hidden information, this is not internet fluff or woo-woo. Putin complained to the United Nations repeatedly that there were bioweapons labs in Ukraine that were working on bioweapons targeting the genetics of the Russian people. Those labs were closed, but there is no guarantee that some of those bioweapons, the materials, are still somewhere in Ukraine available for use. Putin isn't going to back off. And the West is the initiator of the supposed civil war. You had 1 billion a year for 10 years sent into the Ukraine to cause civil unrest by Western powers. And this has been talked about repeatedly within the banking system. It hasn't even been denied. Russia cannot let this stand. That's why they've put nukes even into Belarus. So is it possible that somebody would use a nuclear weapon in Central Europe? Absolutely. You cannot discount that. Would the use of a nuclear weapon in Central Europe and the subsequent potential for a very escalated situation, some type of threat, some type of standoff to the West, cause a pause to be needed and the excuse to be present by this current administration here in the US to pause the election because of some threat? It's very possible. Could some type of escalation in the Mideast raise the tension level to such a height that, again, nuclear weapons could be threatened to be used somewhere in that region that could trigger a global nuclear war? Well, as a matter of fact, a general out of Russia, who was not just anybody, but a very connected, high-ranking general, in an interview just within this last week, at the very tail end of the interview, injected that Israel had fired a nuclear-tipped missile into Beirut when the explosion happened at Beirut that blew up the ammonium nitrate in the harbor in Beirut, devastating Beirut. And in fact, multiple videos have been in existence for quite some time showing that it does appear that there was a missile that initiated that explosion. Now, what was the reason for doing that? In part because there was a processing lab present in the port area that was refining that ammonium nitrate into rocket fuel. You see, Iran sends rockets over and their parts, they have to be assembled. There's no fuel. The fuel is very volatile. They were manufacturing the fuel right there in Beirut in the harbor and then sending the fuel out by truckloads to these missiles, this 100,000 plus missiles that were all over Beirut or all over Lebanon. When that explosion happened, that destroyed the manufacturing facilities and the fuel that was being processed, the ammonium nitrate. So with that in mind, would Israel have been motivated to do such a thing? Absolutely. In fact, there were 4 occasions in Syria about a decade ago where there were explosions over locations where missile components were being shipped from Iran through Syria to Lebanon. And at those locations, there were airburst weapons used that were almost certainly ultra low residue nuclear devices. The Obama administration outed the last one as having been fired from an Israeli submarine that had fired that drone or had launched that drone that carried that particular uh, uh, device that exploded in an air explosion, an airburst in Syria. And numerous people that understand this type of thing have looked at those, the two that were videoed during the daytime, and said that without a doubt that was a particular type of nuclear device, an ultra low residue, very compact nuclear device on a drone, not delivered by a missile. In the way that most people think something like that would happen. And it's the part of the reason that this would make sense is because a normal explosion of chemical devices, C4, something like that, wouldn't have enough energy to do what was done from the altitude it was done, where that burst happened, and the the conjecture was that that was an airburst nuclear weapon, but a tactical one, a very compact one, and with ultra low residue. The contention of the Russian general in the interview that happened over this last week was that the U.S., United States, and France, showing up in Beirut doing support activities after the explosion, participated in the cover-up of the information that would show that that was in fact a nuclear device that was exploded there in Lebanon, blowing up the harbor area. And by the way, the amount of material that was there, this aluminum or this fertilizer that was there, you see a slower burst and a rapid burst initially, and that's because that material is very explosive. We similar to what was purportedly used at Oklahoma, for example, a fertilizer bomb. So with all of that in mind, with what the general announced to the world and this escalated situation with, did Israel in fact use a nuclear device in Beirut? When the explosions happened in Syria back a decade ago, Russia made known that any more attacks of that type over Syria would be met in kind. Now, the reason that was so telling was if you knew it was a tactical nuclear device and you responded, you're going to respond in kind. That meant you use a nuke one more time, we will authorize a nuke to be used to attack those vessels or locations where that's being initiated from. In other words, we'll nuke your sub. Could some type of escalation occur here that could, pause the election? It's hard to imagine a normal warfare with conventional weapons causing a delay. We've had that, numerous times over the years, and that doesn't seem like it would be anything that would cause a delay in an election. But use of a nuke might be a different story, especially if the threat of some broader engagement were present. For example, right now we have, with what I heard earlier today, 56 warships in the vicinity of Yemen right now. And so the question is, are we getting ready to take some action there? Would an action in Yemen, even if it preceded an election period or something, was crossing over an election period, be a reason to pause an election? Not likely. Almost impossible. It would have to be something far greater than that. Then let me just go a different direction for a moment. We know that there's other weapons of mass destruction that can be used. Would it be a biological, as Russia is concerned about? Would it be a nuclear? Back in the 80s and early 90s, we had a number of times where there was negotiations and there was proposed moratoriums that major powers were being asked to sign, barring the use of unusual weapons of mass destruction, such as the ability to generate earthquakes. Now, most of that is used as a trigger. You have places where there's high stress, maybe a few quakes here and there relieve the stress along a fault. If you catastrophically were to release all the energy along a fault in some window, say when the moon is closer and full, or high tides exist, things like that, it can amplify, the effect. And the timing can be precise. Plus, you release it along a long area of the fault as opposed to just a short area that might naturally release. With that in mind, we just had a 7.5 earthquake in Japan. Now, there's been speculation that there was some type of an operation taking place threatening Japanese leadership to accept some type of a deal related to things in the banking world. Is there some scenario where globalista, if you will, people pulling the puppet strings of governments around the world for their own reasons, would have a capability and a desire to try to cause some type of a massive disruption that, if the timing was right and the disruption was great enough, would force that we pause an election here in the United States. Imagine we have things like the Cascadia Fault off the Oregon coast that would affect things up in Washington. We have other faults down in California that could be triggered catastrophically. Would, we've had, talk of weather wars. We had a rogue wave the other day that hit the coast of California that was considered a weather generated wave effect. Is there something that could occur that would be so cataclysmic and disastrous that, in the interests of a fair vote across the country, you would pause a vote, propose to pause it 30, 60, 90 days? Remember, the pause in the 2020 election in the wee hours of the morning of November 4th was only a few hours, but that allowed, and you'll hear more about this. This will come out over the next weeks and months in ways that are not anticipated widely right now. We will watch. You can see if I was right. But there is what we call this F sign, where we see this sudden ratcheting up of votes or flipping of votes going one direction in that window and then restarting. That will be something we will see that happened in 2020. It's already been shown repeatedly, but some of the other reasons how it happened and where it was orchestrated from are the things that will come out over the next many weeks and month or two. As that happens, now you go, okay, how much time would you need to pause the election in 2024 in order to buy the time you need to redo it? Would it be, say, somewhere after the vote has started with mail-in and early voting, but before the final day? Would it be somewhere right in that window where the count can't be completed, or some area where the count is damaged somehow, and you can't proceed with the completion of the vote totals? That's open to speculation. I would say there's a lot of different things that could be dialed in. Would it be something that happens a few months in advance, and it's so catastrophic that the preparations by people involved in the campaigning aren't able to campaign effectively for various reasons, and there's some executive decision to pause for a period of time and revisit it, 60, 90, 120 days later, 180 days later because of some national or global emergency. Whatever the excuse, it is my personal opinion, and it's becoming more widely accepted as not insane that there will be a pause to the 2024 election. Now, when I first said that several years ago, based on what had happened and the fact that we had not gotten control of the vote mechanisms to have an honest vote, the repairs hadn't come in place, including at 2022, it was sacrilege within the establishment political community. But it is no longer considered to be sacrilege, if you will, at this point, because there's more and more understanding that actually, with what's happened, that would be a continuation of a play that's been in the playbook since 2020
Well, it's interesting, Juan, if I can interject, we got to wrap up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dan Scavino, I understood, put something out recently that speaks to an extent of what you just talked about the delay factor on the vote tally and so forth. He spoke about, watch the dawn, or something about the things get resolved at dawn. That's rather reminiscent of what didn't get resolved last go around. Folks, we the question here is, what are some of the critical events that may unfold in 2024, and what we've gleaned from the discussion with Juan, it really needs to be listened to again. One is, of course, the potential of suspension of the vote or no election in 2024. This issue of weapons of mass destruction and the various different geographical areas that may trigger that, and what comes from that, and then the analogy, if you will, that Juan talked about, being tied to the corpse. Of course, the corpse in this case being Biden and the administration. It's kind of funny because he's practically a corpse, whoever that person is anyway. But listen, those are some of the three takeaways here in this discussion. Our time is up. We've been talking with Juan O'Savin on some of the highlighted events that may occur and the twists and turns that may happen surrounding them in 2024. And I do want to break down the election or the no election and how that might play out, perhaps in another broadcast. I want to thank you, Juan, for your time and your unwavering commitment to our cause of freedom. So thank you, sir, for joining me here today.
Of course. Beautiful. Thanks, John. Thanks for letting me talk with you folks.
Hi, this is Sean Morgan with an AMP Consumer Report. Most small businesses are actually owned by conservatives, and most small businesses accept credit cards and debit cards. But who is their credit card processor? Is it a woke corporation that could debank them? Well, Jesse Siegel of Card Solutions is here to explain what he does and why he's better than a big corporation.
Thanks, Sean. So what I do is I eliminate a business's credit card processing expenses by using our dual pricing program that can be utilized with any of our software and hardware solutions.
That's great. So my understanding is you do the point of sale and you also do the merchant
Correct.
Services. So you do it all under one umbrella. Can you explain that?
So if you're a restaurant, you're going to need a point of sale system to track your inventory and to keep track of your employees. And so I provide that. And if you're just a regular retail business, I can provide small devices as well.
Okay, great. And also what I understand is people can call you practically 24/7, and these other corporations, they can maybe wait on the phone.
Correct. So a lot of sales reps are jumping into this business. They sign you up and they forget about you. My customers can reach me 7 days a week. I'm very responsive.
That's great to know. And we have a link below, and we also have your phone number. So if people can get a hold of you, then they will be able to get a free consultation. Thanks for explaining, Jesse, and we'll see you in the next AMP Consumer Report.
Reach a loyal demographic of freedom-loving Americans who vote with their dollars. Promote your Patriot business on AMP News. Contact Sean Morgan at sean@ampnews.us. AMP News is now Patriot.tv.